How many Israelites were there? Now, this is a difficult question because it leads to some soul searching for all of us that study it. And here's a few biblical passages. Exodus 12:37-38 says, the people of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Sukkot, about 600,000 men on foot, besides the women and the children. So 600,000 men on foot. Then Moses said, the people among whom I am number 600,000 on foot. And then we're told in Numbers, all the numbered men of the sons of Israel were 603,550, which suggests, of course, Moses is rounding the number off in the previous statements. But 603,550, and this is again the men who are eligible to fight in battle. And then we get in the second census in the book of Numbers, this was the list of the people of Israel, 601,730. So then, how many Israelites were there? If we take these numbers literally, we have 600,000 adult fighting men. And now in the ancient world, we may assume that nearly all these men are married. So we can add a wife for each. That brings our total up to 1,200,000 people. Then let's give 2 children to each of these families. Of course, some wouldn't have children, some would have more children, but add 2 children for each of these 600,000 couples. That brings our total to 2,400,000 people. Then we got a miscellaneous mixed multitude that's described here as having come out with the Israelites. So we can add another 100,000, round it up to 2.5 million people. If you've heard this number or you've seen it in some of the readings for our class, this is where this number comes from. 2.5 million is calculated from this data. Now, just for your information, as of the year 2016, which is the year that I have information for, Baltimore is a city of 600,000 people. So if the numbers are taken literally, we have the city of Baltimore providing the adult fighting men of Israel. The entire population of Baltimore equals just the army of the Israelites. The city of Houston, Texas has, any of you all from Houston? I don't see any hands raised, but I can't see anybody anyway. Okay. The city of Houston, Texas, according to data in 2016, had 2.1 million people. So the Israelites wandering around Sinai, imagine the city of Houston, Texas, wandering around Sinai. The city of Chicago has 2.7 million people. So imagine every occupant of the city of Chicago wandering around the Sinai Peninsula. And lastly, today, the Sinai Peninsula is home to 1.4 million people. Most of those people live in only 2 cities. Very few people live out in the desert where the Israelites wandered. So you begin to get an idea that the number 2.5 million begins to strain one's credulity just a little bit. But let me make this even harder. If you have 2.5 million Israelites, let's assume they're standing in squares 6 feet on a side. That is, they occupy 36 square feet per person. If each of them took up 36 square feet, the group would occupy 3.25 square miles. That would be a square, 1.75 miles on each side. If you put this group of people 100 across, then you would have 25,000 rows of 100 people across, and that assembly would be 45 miles long. Now, the trip from Goshen to Gaza direct is 170 miles. So we're looking here at the whole group consuming almost a third or a quarter of the total distance between Goshen and Gaza. And all of this is not counting animals and vehicles. We're not counting goats and sheep and oxen and wagons and all the other stuff that folks are carrying. The camp itself, if they're just standing in their 36 square foot square, the camp itself would occupy over 2,000 acres. Now, that is almost the size of Ramses II's world record-setting capital city. The city of Jericho that they're going to conquer occupies only 10 acres. And so already you can see the Israelite camp is 200 times the size of the city of Jericho. 200 or 20? 200 times. Correct my math if I'm wrong about that. So why would they have been intimidated at all by the city of Jericho if their camp alone is 200 times the size of the city? This group would require a minimum of 1.25 million gallons of water and 8 to 10 million pounds of food every single day. It's a lot of manna. The whole population of Canaan, west of the Jordan, has been estimated by archaeologists by a variety of formulas at only 50 to 75,000 people in 1200 BC. And by 1,000 after the Israelite settlement, maybe the population's up to 100 or 150,000. But really, at the time that the Israelites enter Canaan, we're looking at a place where only about 50 to 75,000 people even live. So if there are 2.5 million Israelites, entering Canaan should be easy. They just walk in. There's so many of them. Now, all of this, again, is not counting the animals and the water that the animals would need and the fodder that they would need to eat. Now, all of that is not to try to shake your faith in the Bible, but maybe shake your faith in the traditional interpretation. I really believe the Bible is telling the truth, but I also am increasingly convinced that our translations and our interpretations have made a huge mistake, or a series of huge mistakes in interpreting these numbers. And so here are some of the elements of suggested solutions. And one of them is we have to start off by recognizing the 2.5 million person number is just unreasonable. We have to let that go. I really believe there's no point trying to save that number. It's not possible. And the Bible doesn't tell us that God was running. I mean, imagine the sewage alone. Imagine how much human physical waste there would be. The Bible doesn't tell us that God managed a complete urban infrastructure on the road in the wilderness. He says he fed them with some manna that they could scrape off of plants, and an occasional rock they would strike would give them some water, and that would be enough. Well, for 2.5 million people, you can scrape a lot of plants, and you're not going to get enough to feed those people. Likewise with moving a few rocks and opening a well. So we have to I think we just have to let that number go. It's unreasonable. We also then need to re-examine the text and ask if we have understood the text correctly. And right from the start, the phrase to number or to count is the Hebrew word pakad, which means something more like take responsibility for, and I don't think it's actually a strict accounting word. But that's not really the most important issue. The next one is really more important, and that is that we may be looking at social or organizational units, not literal numbers of people. And so the word thousand that is used in all these texts is the word elef in Hebrew. Now, this is a word that is used to describe the muster of fighting men from a village or a clan. Now, most of the villages that the Israelites settled in had maybe 200 to 250 people. And so how many of those would be battle-worthy males? But if Elef means not 1,000 people, but it means simply the battle-worthy males from a village or a clan, then we're looking at a dramatically smaller number of people. And so this would be more like 605 or 600 fighting militia units, not 600,000. Also, a related word, aluf, which uses the same consonants, means a chieftain. And so 600,000 could have also meant something like 600 groups led by a chieftain, which would come up again to the village or clan fighting units. And so that is probably where the best solution lies, that it isn't 600,000. But remember, the text goes on to say fighting men, not counting women and children. And that suggests we're looking at a socially defined combat unit, and so and not a literal number. So to fit all of the story dynamics, I think that Israel would have needed to be about 10 to 15,000 actual people. And so that's a much more reasonable number than what we've seen before. Also, there are places in the text where the Israelites claim to be too small and insignificant to be able to fight the Canaanites. There's one place where God says, I'm giving you this land not because you're the greatest of all people, you're the smallest of all people. Well, not if there's 2.5 million of them. But in fact, if they're a smaller, much smaller group, then those passages make a lot of sense. So that's the way I see these numbers shaking out. And I do think we have to be very careful. When we tell people there's 2.5 million people wandering around the Sinai Peninsula, we are setting them up to get disillusioned about the realism and historical authenticity of the Bible. And so I think we need to make sure we don't put any unnecessary offense or stumbling block in front of, skeptical people.